I am very, very honored to introduce our very special guest. And let's just start with Professor Gates. Henry Louis Gates Jr. is the Alphonse Fletcher University professor and the director of the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute for African and African American Research at Harvard University. He has done multiple projects for PBS, including African American Lives and Faces of America, which I enjoy very much, and he is the general editor of the Norton Anthology of African American Literature, as well as Call and Response, an innovative core reader for African American Studies. And here we have also Ilan Stavans, who is the Louis Severin Professor in Latin American and Latino culture at Amherst College. And he is also the general editor of the newly published Norton Anthology of Latino Literature. And I also want to mention some of his other books, which I enjoy very much, as well as Spanglish, Latino USA, On Borrowed Words, and many, many, many more. We will begin the program with a discussion between these two great thinkers of our time, and on the relationship between Latinos and African American communities as reflecting in literature. Then they will take questions from the audience, and I know that some of you have some index cards, and we will collect them before the Q&A session. So let's just start.
Great.
Thank you.
Gracias, Patricia. Thank you. Skip, a pleasure to be here with you again.
Thank you, Ilan. Welcome to the hood, brother.
Well, let's start then. Tell me about how you convinced Norton to do the Norton Anthology of African American Literature. Tough job?
I went to, I taught at Yale for 9 years. I'm a Yaley, everyone knows where I work. But I went to Yale, and I loved Yale as an undergraduate, and then I went to Cambridge Graduate School, and then I came back, and I taught at Yale for 9 years. Then I got tenure at Cornell. I was at Cornell for 5 years. And then from 85 to 90. Why is that relevant? Well, the man who invented the whole genre of Norton Anthologies, for those of you who don't know, the Norton Anthology is the Rolls-Royce or the Mercedes-Benz or the Prius or whatever your metaphor for excellence is, of anthologies. It makes a canon of literature. They're adopted by more professors in more universities in the United States than any other single thing, as Ilan knows. It's the gold standard. And cracking it, getting them to publish an anthology of your people's literature, makes your literature legitimate in the eyes of the establishment, the literary establishment. You can argue about it politically. We're not here to discuss whether it's good or bad, though you can, in your questions, you can say, what do you think there should be a canon, what, blah, blah, blah. But this is the bottom line, this is business. And I had this, my ex-wife, Sharon Adams, and I had this beautiful house. And just down the hill lived a man named M.H. Abrams. And the person Mike Abrams, and it was Mike Abrams who invented the genre of the Norton Anthology. He published the Norton Anthology of English Literature, and that in the 50s, and then that led to them doing American literature. Then they started doing other people's literature. And in fact, Mike Abrams is a multimillionaire from his royalties on the Norton Anthology of English Literature, just the way it is. And he was the king of the genre. If Norton would go to him and say, Mike, should there be this anthology? And Mike in his wisdom would say yes or say no. And he liked me, I liked him. We were both colleagues in the English department. And we we were members of a secret society of Cornell professors. Harvard's got a couple of these as well. One started by Emerson, for example. And they're very exclusive, and people don't talk about them. But this one was called The Vicious Circle. And Mike Abrams and Max Black, the great philosopher, were members. And anyway, when Anthony Appiah and I went there, we were both made members of the Vicious Circle. So I got to know this guy. And he liked me, and I liked him. So I couldn't, every day I'd come out of my driveway and I'd be looking at the Norton Anthology of English Literature in my mind because it was Mike Abrams' big mansion just down the road. And I thought, it didn't take long if you're an entrepreneur like you are, and like I am, it doesn't take long. You see the model, and you paint it black. You see the model, you paint it Latino, right?
White.
Yeah. And so I said, Mike, I want to edit the Norton Anthology of African American Literature. And he goes, oh, wow. So it took me 2 years to persuade W.W. Norton to do this anthology. And you know why? They said, we don't think there are enough sales in the classroom of people studying a whole course in black literature. The permissions for this anthology are huge. And it's a business, man. You know, there's nothing sentimental about this and that. Norton is a commercial company, a profit-making company. And they were only willing to do it if it could be shown that there would be a profit. And so
And how did
I
you have to show it?
So I wrote to all my friends teaching black literature throughout the world. And I said, you write to the editor of the W.W. Norton thing. And it really, with all of that, I really did that. But with all that, it took 2 years. And finally, I'll never forget the night he called me and he said, they're going to call you tomorrow. It's been approved. And then I picked, for political reasons, I should have done 5 like you did. But I picked 10 other people, half men, half women. Some on the left, not many, but left of center, nobody really on the right. But I wanted to democratize the process. I didn't want a whole bunch of people to feel excluded in my generation of critics. I wanted them to be, because we were making history. And I remember when I had the organizational meeting of these editors at Cornell, we posed for a picture, aware that we were making history. And you know what the punchline is? The hardback edition is called the trade edition. The edition that goes in the classroom is paperback. And the Norton Anthology of African American Literature, as Ilan knows, is the best-selling trade edition Norton Anthology in history. And the reason is the black middle class, the well-educated people, the same people, you know, when you all were growing up, you had either Britannica or World Book, and it was a piece of intellectual furniture as well, or the great books. You know, the great books are probably the most unread piece of intellectual furniture. People get them, but who's going to read Thucydides? You know, oh, what are you doing? Want to watch TV tonight? Oh, no, I'm reading Thucydides. But the Norton Anthology of African American Literature is the best-selling trade edition, and I am pleased. And before you ask the next question, what Ilan has accomplished in terms of persuading them subsequently to do this for Latino literature, because remember, think about how well established the black minority is. In 2 years was nothing. I mean, I was there, I just beat on them. I knew I was going to win. I hoped, I prayed, you know. I figured I'd get Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton up there on their ass if they didn't do it. But you couldn't do that. So I want you, ladies and gentlemen, to give it up for Ilan Stavans for what he has accomplished.
You're a sweetheart. No, it's good. Thank you, Skip.
He asked me to do that.
One of the things that Norton says is that you were astonishingly successful in selling this to the black middle class. But it strikes me, Skip, that if, and no doubt about it, this is such a bestseller, it's because you were able to sell it also to the middle class that is not black.
Well, now in the trade edition, it sold, I would say, first of all, you have library sales. But the bulk of those sales went to well-educated black people who were professionals, who just wanted either to give it as Christmas presents, or Kwanzaa present, right? Or wanted to have it on their shelf in their living room so that when you come in, you would see the same.
Like Thucydides.
But I did the same. Yeah. I did the same thing with the Encyclopedia Africana that Anthony and I edited, so that everybody in the black middle class would get a copy of that. Yeah. But we have a very well-educated black, you know, middle class, upper middle class, and they're very proud of, they're like mini closet black nationalists, and they're proud. You know, you go in, there's a John Coltrane poster and a Romare Bearden print, and the Norton Anthology of African American Literature and the Encyclopedia Africana. It's bourgeois black nationalism, but that's what it is.
But you see,
and I like that.
We don't.
That's my market.
Let me tell you the other side of the story. The side of the story is that my side of the story is that it was you editing the Norton Anthology of African American Literature that made me think exactly what you thought when you saw this other anthology. Why not have one for Latinos? Latinos have made it into this society. We are being represented all over. It is time that we have a book that makes a statement, makes a splash.
And excuse me, and I got the idea, not only because I saw Mike Abrams, but because they had just published the Norton Anthology of Literature by Women. So the genre was created, and all I did was paint it black,
Yeah.
and what you did was paint black Latino, which is part black.
We talked about it earlier today on the show.
It's mestizo. You painted it mestizo.
That's right.
No, and thank you for saying that, because it's a great triumph for me.
Well, you've been a role model. You've been a compass, a map for me, and I've told you many times, and I really...
Well, I just met your wife, so you're a role model for me.
That was
You all
Skip.
can laugh at that.
How many years did it take you to put this together? Yours?
10 years. And it took 10 years because, and this is a hard thing for people to understand, but I think you did. When we started, only I know this is true because I looked in my co-editor's eyes, only I believed we could do it. It's the same when you have a student trying to write a PhD, and you look at them, you can see that fear, they're never going to finish. You have to teach them how to finish. They have to imagine themselves across the finish line. So the way you do it, if they're writing a 200-page thesis, you could see they're going to have a nervous breakdown. Usually the first line is, I'm going to go to law school to save my Latino people. And you know that they don't believe they can actually write the PhD. So God has spoken to them, they're going to go to law school or med school. You don't think you can finish. They go, no, I can't finish. So I say, well, have you ever written a 20-page paper? And they say, yeah. And I said, well, a 200-page thesis is only 10, 20-page papers. They go, oh, well, never thought of that. And then you have to break it down. So I had to do that the same with these editors. One quit. I had a different co-general editor, Mary Helen Washington, good friend who was at the time at BU.
Quit because of what?
Well, I think that she had anxiety that she couldn't finish it. And she created this ideological contretemps, are we going to be left-wing enough or something? But it was all hot air, I mean, much as I love her personally, and I let her go, and I replaced her with Nellie McKay. And then I had to sit down with each of the editors and say, this is how the process is going to go. And finally, to finish, what I did, I got my own graduate students to be research assistants to each of the period editors, no matter where they were. I was the only person here in Boston.
So that was a way to kind of get them moving.
And they wrote drafts. My graduate students wrote drafts of the headnotes, the footnote, they did the whole thing for the people. And then the period editors would say, they would rewrite them or do whatever, but they needed a research assistant. And I was here, my graduate students knew we could do it. But the scholars out there, they would tell the story differently if they were here. But I know this is a true story. They never were going to finish, never going to finish, because they couldn't imagine finishing. It's monumental. Now, we take it for granted. The thing is we're about to edit the 3rd edition. I came up with this crazy idea that we would be the first anthology in history to include a CD with all of the black vernacular literature, the oral literature, the blues, on a CD. That took me another year to persuade Norton because of the permissions too. And then they think, well, what will we do with it? Where is it? And if you look in the back of our anthology, there's a little envelope. Remember in the library card when you were in elementary school and high school? It has a CD in it. And people couldn't figure out how we're going to do that, nobody could believe it. Do you remember in the Roadrunner? And Wile E. Coyote, he always runs off the cliff. As long as he doesn't look down, he's cool. As soon as he looks down, he falls. I had to keep from looking down. I had to say, we can do it, we can do it. I knew they could do it. But, one time I was described as a mixture of some scholar and P.T. Barnum. But to be an entrepreneur, to get people, you have to lead them. Sometimes you have to knock their head. We can do this. And many people, whether in minorities, whether they're women, I know women aren't technically a minority, but they're minority in power centers. I would imagine brown people, Latinos, and I know this is true for black. I've been black 60 years. Many times, powerless people who feel powerless will create a diversion another crisis because they have an inferiority complex.
Well, let me, because I want to ask you something about being an entrepreneur, but let me
Okay.
tell you, as you know,
I'll sell you the answer.
Amherst doesn't have graduate students.
I know, that's too bad.
So you know who wrote all the entries?
You're undergraduates.
No,
Who?
myself.
Ah, you see? That was the same thing.
I should have.
No.
I should have moved to Harvard and have graduate students
Yeah.
do all the hard work.
But no, I don't want to impugn my colleagues. They wrote drafts, you see? So that all of a sudden these people who were busy, and I didn't, many of the, unlike you, if you look at a Norton Anthology of American literature, Norton Anthology of English literature, they're not superstar editors.
No.
The people who are editors who have time to edit are not the guys who are on TV. These are just people who like work in the library all the time, the way we used to be. You know what I mean? But so I picked superstars because they were going to kill me anyway, politically, if I didn't include them, right? But they were also the finest people in African American literature, without a doubt. But they were so busy, and then they had this crisis of confidence. They didn't believe they could do it, and blah, blah, blah. And it is a lot of work. Every entry's got a headnote. You have to footnote it. And you need somebody who's in the library. Who's in the library? Graduate students. So they were my PhD students, and they would just send each of these
So
scholars.
the graduate students are like the Mexicans in California that are doing all the hard work.
They were well paid. They were well
They
paid.
were well paid. It took
No.
me, you were
I
comparing.
believe in spreading the wealth.
You were talking about which one is longer, and did we decide that mine is a few pages longer? But it certainly was
No,
longer
hell no.
in terms of years. It took me 13 years. And Julia Reedhead, our common editor, used to tell me, it took Skip 10.
That's right.
Are you going to be able
And
to
you
do it
did
in
it-
10?
you did it in
In
13?
13, because I'm Jewish. I had to do.
You can't be talking about whose is longer in this conversation. This is going to embarrass.
Let me. The moment you were phoned by Norton and told we would like to offer you a contract, did you have a reaction from others saying, "Why you? Why should you be the canon maker who will decide what goes into a Norton anthology?"
No, because everyone knew that it was my dream. See, when I get an idea, I talk about it all the time in public. You know the concept when you were a kid, I'm spitting on it. Remember that? You spit on it to yours within your family. Well, I would spit on the idea because I didn't want anybody to beat me to it. And I would give talks. I'd say, we're going to have a Norton Anthology. It's going to have a CD in it. People go, yeah. They go, can you do that? I didn't even know myself. But so everybody knew. And then I democratized the process by including 10 people. See, you were smarter to do 5. With ours.
And do it myself.
Yeah. But but you could have done it by yourself, and so could have I. I could have done it
We couldn't have done it ourselves.
in 10 years. I could have done it in 10 years.
Yeah, but
But I didn't know it was going to take 10
we
years.
would have been crucified in public had we done it.
Oh, no, the question was, could we have?
Yeah.
Did we have the capacity to? Yes. But he's absolutely right. If we didn't have women and men, diversity within the community, we would have been fried.
Skip, how did you decide, you and your colleagues and your graduate students, what was left out?
Oh, no. Let me be clear. The graduate students, research.
No, I'm talking about editorial criteria.
No, I know. I want to be clear. The research assistants, the graduate students were just research assistants. All scholars, if they can, have research assistants. But it was the professors, the editors. We decided, and the way I did it to avoid controversy. You see, initially, people wanted to have these meetings, and let's say I'm the 19th century editor. I would be arguing with you, the 18th century editor, about what's in your period. I was smart enough to know we did not want that. So essentially, I divided it up as fiefdoms. So the 2 18th century editors, you have total discretion. The 19th century editors, you have total discretion. It's your field, you're the expert, you're the man, you're the woman. You tell us what's in it. That was a really good move.
That was
because
a really
we
good
would have
move.
had nothing but fights and
I
arguments.
did the same thing. I separated the different periods, the colonial period, 19th century, but I did it also by national background. Yeah, that is the Mexican Americans, the Cuban Americans. The fear that I had, Skip, was that I would ultimately be making many books that would be bound by common covers. That is, that I was making a Mexican American anthology and a Cuban American anthology, and I needed at some point to be the bridge between those different editors and traditions, because the Latino literary tradition is, I think, different from the one that you're describing.
Absolutely.
We have parallel lines. The Cuban American tradition has not intersected with the Mexican American or the Puerto Rican, but for one or two places in one.
But you still integrated them chronologically, didn't you?
Yeah, and
but I think that's brilliant. You see, I designed for Norton, and it hasn't been approved yet because the next one we're doing is the Norton Anthology of African American Poetry. But I designed a similar Norton Anthology of African literature, which has the same problems as you do, which is all these national literatures. But still, it would be organized from, you see, these anthologies are organized around something technically called historical principles, and all that means is the birth of the author. So that if you, you open it up and...
Chronologically, by date of birth.
Chronologically by date of birth, except period to period. So,
yeah.
I mean...
And we have two tables of contents in ours.
Oh, you do?
We have the one that you're describing.
Right.
And then we have, for those that want to teach Cuban American literature, we have a section that is all Mexican American authors, all Cuban Americans, all Puerto Ricans, all Dominicans, and so on and so forth. So they were afraid, at Norton, they were afraid that this would end up being a book that would speak to everybody, but to nobody in particular.
Uh-huh.
And we needed to make some sort of connection between the particular and the universal.
So how did you do that?
Well, we did it by creating kind of multiple books in one. There's a chronology that goes from beginning to end, and then there are the parallel books, the Mexican American, by having two tables of contents, and by me creating this kind of connections after receiving all the first draft of the head notes, saying, well, now I have to create an organic book here that is not going to be only about Mexican Americans, or the biggest fights that we would have would be, oh, you guys are East Coast, the Norton Anthology is going to be kidnapped by New York, and Mexican Americans are not truly being represented, in spite of the fact that there are 30 million, 7 out of 10 are Mexican Americans, the Cubans and the Puerto Ricans are going to take over.
Okay, well, explain to us the national tradition, the separate strands that are woven together to make quote-unquote Latino American, which is Hispanic American literature, though we can't say that anymore. So there's Mexican American, there's Puerto Rican American.
Puerto Rican in the mainland and in the island, because remember, Puerto Rico is part of the United States.
Right, that's two.
Cuban Americans.
Cuban American.
And then there's the colonial period,
Colonial
which
period,
it's
right.
Spaniards mostly.
Right.
And then there
Like
are
Las
what we
Casas
call,
and-
right. And then the big number of Colombians, Panamanians, Argentines, Dominicans.
Jesus.
Jesus is right.
It's a long way.
Yeah.
But so, in effect, by editing, you see the importance of what he's done. By editing this anthology, he's created a new tradition. He's made all these different strands come together in a new weave. But now it'll be perpetuated, because I could teach. I could teach intro to Latino literature. It's all in English.
You should.
I could do it.
Yeah.
No, but
Yeah, no,
that's
I
the
get-
point of doing
well,
a Norton Anthology.
what
And
would-
any of you could teach an intro to Afro because there's a Norton
They,
Anthology.
when I signed the contract, I remember, Skip, sending the yes letter by fax. I no longer have a fax. By fax, thinking, oh my God, do I really understand what I'm getting into? The process that I have in front of me? And I did not. It was 13 years ago. I have a son who's 14. I had hair. So many things have
No,
changed.
but it is a lot
It's
of work.
enormous.
So you
enormous.
have the arguments among the editors about what's going to be in. But to go back to your question, because I gave each editor, period editor, full discretion, we didn't have that argument. We never would have finished if people would have been in each other's period and saying, how could you have this by Toni Morrison? Can you have that? It's like none of your business. And a couple times I had some of the editors who would say, like the 18th century editor would say, I don't like what's in the Harlem Renaissance, or I don't like what's in the 60s, and I would say, it's none of your business. Because I knew in the end, there were only two votes. Nellie McKay is dead now, unfortunately, but she was my co-general editor. The only two votes that mattered were Nellie's and mine. I mean, we could have overridden any of the other period editors if push came to shove. We didn't ever have, I think maybe once we had to do that, and we just did it. But other than that, we respected it. And actually, and it wasn't generosity, it wasn't just politics or power. I picked people who were experts in, say, the 18th century or the the Harlem Renaissance. And so, we gave them their head.
How you were talking about the success of the anthology, and I truly hope that the Latino Anthology comes close to what you've been able to achieve, because you were masterful in selling the product, as Norton calls it, to an entire community. And Skip, the African American community has been connected with literature for a long time.
They have.
There is no the differences with the Latino community are enormous. We are a community that is made of storytelling, but not necessarily connected with the book per se.
Right.
And it's going to be an interesting process to see in what way does the community respond to the anthology. But I want to ask you something.
Sure.
And
I'll tell you how I did it.
yeah, because I want to hear that, and I
Okay.
want to hear also an answer to this question. In what sense, in what way has the anthology changed African American literature?
Oh, that's a good question.
Meaning the new crop of writers?
Sure. All the new writers have now read the canon. All of the new black writers have taken a black literature course. That was impossible. I took my first black literature course, per se, I guess, in 1976, when I'd come back from graduate school in England, And if you think about the great black writers like Ralph Ellison, he never took a black literature course. They didn't exist. There was a black literature course at Howard. It was introduced in the late 20s. So if you went to Howard, Toni Morrison went there, she could have studied Negro literature with Sterling Brown, who was a great man. But 99% even of the historically black colleges didn't have black literature courses up to a certain period. Now, you can presume that every black writer whose works you read, whose works are reviewed in, say, the New York Times, Sunday Magazine, Sunday Book Review, has taken an African American literature course, A, and most probably used the Norton Anthology, B.
So what does that
one
mean?
of the reasons you do it is that it's cheap. You can have a course of the text, as I said earlier,
Yeah.
and we have 11 full-length works. So this thing costs, I don't know what it costs now, $30. So let's say, how much is
No. Well,
what?
mine is, I think, $60
In hardback?
Yeah, I don't know.
No, but in paperback.
But in paperback, in the educational market, it's more expensive.
Okay.
Because that's where Norton makes the money.
All right, but you can, instead of buying 11 full books separately, which would be a bunch more expensive, you buy one book, it's got 11 books in it.
Right. Mine also has 3 complete novels and 3 complete plays.
Yes.
But go further. Does that mean that those writers that have read the canon, that have been introduced to their own literature through your anthology, have a different type of literature that they are producing because they are more conscious of the tradition?
Interesting question, too. No. It means that they're more formally trained in the tradition, but black writers have been reading and revising each other since the 18th century. So the first genre of black literature, many of you know, is called the slave narratives. And we found out when I wrote Signify Monkey, there's one chapter talking about how the first 5 black men who wrote slave narratives between 1770 and 1811 used the same image and revised it. They all stole from each other. But it's not called stealing, it's called intertextuality. But they all have one figure, and you know what the figure is? The figure is, I was a slave, and I was on a slave ship, or I was on the plantation, and they were illiterate, and I'll show you. And the slave says, I saw the most amazing thing. I saw a book speak to my master. And what they're describing is the master opening the book, and usually the book's the Bible, or the Psalter. The Psalter, for those of you who are not of the Christian tradition. Well, you don't have to be. It's the book of Psalms, right? That's the Psalter. And the slave would say, I saw the book speak to the master, for so I thought it did. And then when the master left the room and put the book down, I waited till he was gone, and I went over surreptitiously, and the book refused to talk to me. And you know how you know this story? Because you're reading a book written by that slave. It's a metaphor, it's an allegory. The slave made the book speak because the slave wrote a book, which is speaking to you and telling you a story about how the book refused to speak to him. Isn't that beautiful? That same scene is in the first 5 slave narratives ever written. Now, that didn't happen. There ain't that much coincidence in the world. That's called intertextuality. So even in the 18th century, black people were reading and revising each other's works. And I'm sure that's true. I know it's true between some Latino writers and black writers like Nicholas Guillen in Cuba and Langston Hughes, Harlem Renaissance, and the Leopold
But
Senghor
it happens
in Senegal.
among Latinos much more within their own national tradition, say the Cuban American writers reading each other.
Until now.
Until
because
now.
of you.
And hopefully this will create a kind of pan-American
Yes.
view of things for writers.
No, but you have done something more dramatic than my colleagues and I did. Because you see, you are forcibly forging a new canon. All we did was consolidate what was already there and perpetuate it.
But you see, you are black. And you're an entrepreneur.
I'm only
and you
part
were,
black.
Well, you became white when you went to... but there was no
You're
big,
funny.
There was never a big, I am white and an immigrant and Jewish. And if I answered the question that I asked you, the moment that I signed the contract, there was a lot of questioning. Why he? Well, he's not mestizo. He doesn't have a last name Suarez or Stavans, or Stavans he does.
And you said because you had the idea.
Yeah. And I did exactly what you did, which is I pushed it, I was enamored with it, I spread the word, and I said, I want to do this. This is my project. I'll fight for it as much as I can. But
I admire you for that, and you won.
I won, and I'm very happy, but it didn't come without...
No, a lot of pain.
The
I'm sure.
volcanization.
I didn't have that problem because everybody, all of our... Oh, no, this is very interesting. One of our editors was white, is white, William Andrews. And nobody disputed, because this guy is a world's expert on the slave narratives. And for the Norton Anthology of African American Poetry, Kim Benson will be one of the editors. And one of our editors has died. One of them has retired. So the one who's retired will be replaced by, it's not formal, so I can't say it is, but by a white. So there will be 2 white editors. And let me say, when I made the joke about being only part black, no black person in the United States, not one, is 100% African because of slavery. If I did the DNA of all the black people in this room, let's start with the black men. If I did, this is off point, but I don't want to lose this because we're talking about purity and hybridity. 35% of all black men, 35%, that's more than 1 out of 3, right? Descend from a white man who impregnated a black woman in slavery. And you all know my African American Lives series. I've done the DNA of very dark black people, light black people, medium black people. Not one, not Don Cheadle is 19% white. Don Cheadle is in the admixture. There's not one. Bishop T.D. Jakes is not 100% African. We are hybrid people already because of the slave trade.
And I think that is something
And
that
so
both minorities...
are the Latinos.
Yeah, that's something that both minorities really show, that you might be racial or ethnic or minority defined, but you are a hybrid, you're a sum of parts. I want to
Sure.
ask you something about language, but I just want to let the audience know that after this, we'll open it up to questions.
But I know everybody wants to know what I'm asking. How, first of all, it must have been very painful for you for people to say you are not legitimate, that you don't have the authenticity because what would you say, you're Jewish and you're European, of Europe?
And I'm white.
And you're white. Yeah, but there are a lot of white Latinos.
It was, I learned...
Is it because you're not Latino? I mean, or
it's
do you...
because your question...
I thought you were Latinos.
Good, that's enough. If you did...
All them Latinos look alike.
There's a lot of internal debate within the community, as there is in the black community, of how dark, how black are you, or how light you are. And in the Latino community, we don't talk openly about race. We use diminutives when we have to refer to race. El negrito, the little black one, or la gordita, the little fatty one, instead of addressing the issue in an upfront fashion. And there is also this hierarchy of blacks at the very bottom,
always,
and whites at the very top.
In every Latino society, my new series is called Black and Latin America. It'll be on PBS in April. I filmed in 6 countries all summer, and in each one, the bottom is always the darkest, most African-looking people in each society, except for Haiti. But Haiti still has mulatto elite too.
Yeah.
But it's less pronounced than any other country. It's still
Absolutely,
color.
yeah.
Each of these societies is color
And
struck.
there's much racism within the Latino community, as we were talking
Absolutely.
today. But I want to ask you a
Unfortunately.
question. One of the key elements in our anthology, in the Latino Anthology, had to do with language. Because the early texts are in the colonial period, they were written in Spanish by Spaniards, missionaries, explorers, conquistadors. We had to translate from Spanish into English. Not until 1951 is the first Mexican-American novel written in English.
Really?
Until 1951. There's poetry that happens before, but a lot is being done in Spanish. Up until 1951, in Spanish, it gets changed after 1951 and after 1959, and then there is this big move to write in English for an English-speaking audience about the Latino experience, up until the 90s, when there is a hybrid language, Spanglish, that is neither here nor there, a mixing of Spanish and English. Spanglish goes back to the 70s, it might go back to the 19th century, but one of the things that we had to deal with, Skip, was what to do with language in terms of making it accessible to the reader of the Norton Anthology. And I would have a copy editor who would say, this is beautiful Spanglish, but who's going to understand it? Can we translate it? I would say, you can't translate Spanglish. That would be like looking at a photograph from the reverse.
Yeah. Well, good for you. I'm glad you
had to protect it.
That's ridiculous.
But
that would be to change the literature.
But it's because they had a vision of who the reader would be that was very different from mine. Mine was, this is going to be for anybody who looks at this clash of two cultures and clash of two languages and embraces it, and they were scared.
The worst thing that could have happened would be for you to be reviewed in the New York Times and it'd say, this is a fraudulent book. I mean, because you've done damage to the text. So what you did was absolutely correct. But being accused of not being authentic enough is painful, without a doubt. And you survived, and you did it, now you're the man. I like that.
Let's open it to the audience.
Okay, that's great. You don't have to. If anybody wants to ask a question.
We have plenty to talk too, but there's...
You can ask a question. Stand up and ask.
Wait. We're going to do the two methods, or we're going to circulate the...
If you don't mind. Yeah, no, I like hearing it from the audience, unless you're really shy. Oh, but let me say one thing before. But there's one thing that's still hanging. How I did it. Nellie and I, we had a big event at the New York Public Library that was packed. Then we had one in Harlem at the Schomburg, which is the Harlem branch of the New York Public.
Right.
It was packed. Then we went on NPR, like we did today. We were on TV. We were on CNN. You know, we just hit it. And then we got reviewed in the New York Times and the Post, and then Ebony and Essence. And
everywhere.
We did, and that's by going to your own people's magazines like Ebony and Essence and stuff. Just a little one-paragraph thing. Every black family should have this thing. Boom, the sales went through. That's what you have to do.
Well, that's what we've done.
Yeah.
That's what we've done, and obviously this just came out a month and a half ago, and we've been I've been traveling the country nonstop. Hopefully, it will materialize. My dream is really that this is an anthology not for Latinos. I did not want to make a ghetto anthology. I wanted to make an anthology by Latinos, for Latinos, but for everybody else as well.
Yeah, but if our sales, if we depended on white people to buy the Norton Anthology or African-American Literature hardback, we wouldn't have any sales. I mean, we have a few liberal people from Cambridge, you know, the People's Republic of Cambridge say, oh, I'm giving you this. Guy said, color people's anthology.
But Skip, there is a black middle class that is far more solid and larger than a Latino middle class.
Yes, but you have a huge... In L.A., you got a big Mexican-American middle class.
So we had a packed show there.
So you go there and you appeal to them.
Yeah.
In Miami, you did the Cuban-American.
We had a packed show.
Hell, I could sell this anthology, boy. What's wrong with you?
You should come with me.
Okay.
we really, I have to begin by telling you that Latinos are not an ethnic, something that you know, an ethnic or a racial group. We're a minority group. That is, we are made, as you can see, of people of all colors, of all backgrounds, of all national lines. And so there are white Latinos and black Latinos and mestizo Latinos, just as there are male and female Protestants and Catholics and so on. There's a very solid number of black Latinos that come from Puerto Rico, from Cuba, from the Dominican Republic, from Mexico, that live in the United States. By Latino, we are describing people of Hispanic background that live in the United States and not people in Latin America. Those are called Latin Americans. And so when talking about the Latino anthology, we talk about a black experience within it that is as essential as the mestizo experience or the white experience or the Asian experience. There are Asian Latinos as well.
Yeah, but where is the continuum? I mean, to me, and I'll talk about the series, it's people who look black, right? And I was like, if your ass was in Harlem, you'd be called black. And this is when I'm in Dominican Republic where nobody was black. No matter how black they were, they go like, I go, where are the black people? They go, in Haiti. This is true. I do a whole thing called Divided Island about Dominicans. And so I'm interviewing this, as I said, when we were on TV, the taping for GBH, this anthropologist, man who in here, if he walked in here, he'd say, look at that black man, right? And his name is Juan Rodriguez. And I said, Juan, we're walking through the middle of Santo Domingo. And I go, well, you're a very handsome black man. I said, I can't find any black people, any self-identifying black people in Dominican Republic. So when did you find out you were black? He said, when I went to New York. Because all these people, no, we're not black, we're Hispanic, we're Dominican. But they look phenotypically black. Now, here's the problem with that. The reason that we have such crazy definitions of blackness is because of slavery. Do you know that the law of hypodescent, which is a one-drop rule, still is the law of the land? And I was shocked. Last week, in the Harvard Gazette, our official university publication, my friend James Sedanius, who's a black psychologist and another scholar, did this new book, new research on, who's black and et cetera, et cetera. The Supreme Court, as late as 1985, affirmed that this one woman, who was 1/32 or some ridiculous fraction black, could not put the word white on her passport. That she was black legally because she had this one black ancestor so many generations ago. We are the only society, maybe you apartheid South Africa, but we are the only society really where that's true today. That if you have one black ancestor, you are black. It's ridiculous. My admixture, to my horror, not horror, but to my shock, as you know from the series, I'm 50% white, 50% black. But I don't look like I'm 50% white. And there are people come up to me and say, how can you be half white? Because we think if a black person marries a white person, they look, like a mulatto. I don't know how you think I look, but I don't look like I'm half white even to me. But genetically, I'm half white.
But when you say this, and you say it often on television and among people, do you get a portion of the black leadership that is saying, keep your mouth shut, we don't want to hear this?
No, because look at the black people in this room. I have a black friend who teaches at Harvard. I won't embarrass her. She's one of my best friends. She's light complected. She won't let me do her DNA because she has to be 60, 70% European. But she wants to preserve this fiction that she's blacker than she is white. And it's just not the way it is. Because of slavery, it was because of rape and enforced sexuality, historically, and then more recently, choice. We've been intermarrying with, no matter how separate the law demanded the races to be in America. When the lights came down, people slept together.
I guess it would be the
and
equivalent.
And they still are.
I guess it would be the equivalent, Skip. I know we were talking about race earlier on, and we're obviously talking right now as well. But when I come from Mexico, and when you are in Mexico...
I thought you came from Europe.
From Polish background, Jewish. When you tell Mexicans that they are half Spaniards, they don't like it.
Because they're only half?
No, because the fact that it's
they want to be Native American?
They don't want to be Spaniards.
Right.
They feel the Spaniards came, raped, and left.
But that's what Eva Longoria said to me. She wanted to be, she's 60-40 about Spanish to Native American. And some of you saw her on my last show. She wanted to be 60% Native, 40%. And then she has 3% black,
right.
So it's 37 and 3. But that's not the way it is. Not the way. Yeah, but they killed the Indians. I mean, it's hard to have a lot of Native American percentage.
They killed the Indians, but they raped the Indians as well.
Of course they did,
That's
yeah.
what's the mestizo...
Yeah, but you inherit half of your genome from your mother and father. So if you do the math, if you kill everybody in 1600, 1700, there's not that much of that DNA left. People ask me all the time, how come, if we all came from Africa, which 50,000 years ago we did, how come when you do the admixture test, say Meryl Streep didn't have any African ancestors? The reason is that African DNA has disappeared because it's halving each time. It's being cut in half. Over 50,000 years, how much is left? So an admixture test really measures your DNA for the last 500 years since the time of Columbus.
Now, I'm as interested as the person who asked the question about your new series on Latin America.
Oh, okay. I looked at 6 countries. It's typical of larger themes in South America. Mexico and Peru is 1 hour. Brazil's 1 hour. Cuba is 1 hour. And Haiti and the DR, 1 hour. And I explore different things: music, religion, and culture, how black they are, their attitudes about race. Mexico, here's a shock. Mexico received 100,000 more black slaves from Africa than the United States did. And nobody knows that. 550,000 Africans went to Mexico, and 150,000 went to Peru. So I do that one as a surprise, because a lot of people, as you know, don't realize.
Oh, certainly in Mexico they don't want to hear about it.
No, in Mexico, but they have an expression in Mexico saying there's a black grandma in the closet. And in every family, you get 4 kids. One of them's got a little negrito thing going on there. And if you go to Acapulco, famous Acapulco, in the 18th century, it was 70% black. And south of Acapulco is a place called the Costa Chica. It's a region of Mexico. It's like Africa. And on the East Coast, on the Gulf, it's Veracruz.
But is this the pride that you find in encountering the blackness, the same one that we Jews have in saying, oh, Columbus must have been Jewish, or the Pope must have been Jewish?
I mean, no blackness. It's like my friend Malefi Asante. We argue. He's an Afro-Centric. We argue in public. We really like each other in private. And he'll say to me, boy, you could be so effective for us if you just got your head together. And I was like, yeah, but you're too far, the black nationalist. But I am a black nationalist in another sense. I'm not like an Afrocentrist black nationalist, but what do? My whole life, my whole intellectual life is black. There will never be a need. Nobody will ever again have to worry about whether there could be a black encyclopedia. Nobody will ever have to reinvent the wheel. Nobody will ever say, can there be a black anthology? We did that, man. I'm proud of that, And it's a good thing. And you could say, you might not like my politics, you might not like the fact I married a white woman, you might not like this. Too bad. I left the artifacts for my people. And that's the way it is. And the other thing, when you're black, the most common thing black people say when they imagine you're not black enough or you're this or something like, if you bleed, if you let that bother you, it's like werewolves with a hemophiliac. Black people just pick you to death. You just have to say, my daughter, Maggie, is getting a PhD. I have 2 daughters, you all know that. And Maggie she looks white, and my father looks white, and the Gates is a long line of mulattoes. I look like my mother. So my younger daughter looks like me. Maggie looks white. So when she's a little kid, I said to her, because I remember my father told me his father said to him, you're going to have a hard time because you look white, and the white people are going to give you a hard time when they find out you're not white. And the black people are going to give you a hard time because you're so white, they're going to think that you don't like them and stuff. And I was very moved by my father told me that. So I told Maggie when she's old enough, I said, sooner or later, somebody black's going to tell you you're not black enough, that you're not really black because you got straight hair, you look white. And she said, well, what do I say to them, Daddy? I said, baby, I want you to remember this, okay? She said, what? Okay. I said, tell them, kiss your black ass. And you do that, people go away. They go, goddamn, you know. But if you say, oh, I'm going to wear an afro and get a dashiki, and oh, please.
I have to tell my son Josh, who gets this thing that he's not Mexican enough to do something similar.
You know, like, screw you.
In Spanish. Skip, wouldn't it be a more perfect universe if our anthologies did not exist? And, wait.
What?
Yeah. And
I couldn't afford the suit.
And there would be a true representation in the Norton Anthology of American literature where blacks and Latinos would have the space that they need to have. Did we end up doing these two books in order for the Norton Anthology of American literature to be more elastic?
Yes and no. There are different ways to teach a text. There are different canons. So look how fat this book is. And by the way, it's 200 pages shorter than the Norton Anthology of African American Literature. Sorry, brother. You got to try again next time. You know.
Next edition, right?
You know, remember how they used to tell Martin Luther King, you have to take your time. And your people will come along. But we'll get to you in 1 minute. So here it goes like this. This text from this anthology will seep into the Norton Anthology of American Literature. So the Norton Anthology of American Literature is not going to get bigger. See, this is physically
impossible to be bigger.
Impossible. The book will fall apart if it's any bigger than this. And so, but what will happen for the one on American literature, it will start to include in the next edition some of the texts in here. Just like if you look at the Norton Anthology of American Literature, it's blacker now than it was 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago. But it can't have that much Latino literature in the Norton Anthology of American Literature, right? So you need your own discrete tradition so that you can have 2,600 pages.
Not so discrete.
Well, I mean, discrete in the sense of self-contained.
Yeah.
C-R-E-T. But then you need to integrate the larger American canon so that we need an integrated American literature, and then we need, people have the right to have a course in Latino literature or African literature. You teach more of these texts, but both. So we are canon makers and canon breakers at the same time.
Great.
Yeah, she said certain marginalized groups can internalize oppression. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why we see so much self-destructive behavior among black people or among poor Latino people. It's the same thing.
Let me.
Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I don't want to take. I want you to
No,
take
you
it first.
can.
But I want to ask you something.
How can people stop being self-destructive?
How? Let me add to that, Skip. What is? We both put a lot of hope in literature, and we both think that literature is both a mirror and a tool for change. Mm-hmm. What can a poem do? What can a poem really change a society?
No, I don't. No, to me, it's too much of a burden to put on a writer, the goal of changing society. What's literature about? The two great things with literature, love and death. They're the first two things all literature is about, love and death. Most literature that's explicitly political is not very good literature. If it's subtly political, implicitly political, then that's okay. But I don't know of a revolution that was created by a poem.
No, I fully agree with you.
And I don't think there's going to be one.
One of the best poets of Latin America is Pablo Neruda. One of the worst poets of Latin America is Pablo Neruda.
Right. When he's being political.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think the same is true in the African American tradition. Look at Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison says famously, people in her hometown hate her books because they're so complicated. They're not about noble black people translating. It's about black people turning in on themselves and all kind of crazy things happen. And we know it's true in the tradition. 70% of all black children are born out of wedlock. Okay? Half the black kids in high school don't graduate. Our people think it's easier to be a hip-hop star than a doctor or a lawyer. Do you know that there are, according to the 2000 census, I haven't looked at the 2010 census, there were 100 more black cardiologists than there are the total number of black men in the NBA. But nobody knows that. Kids think it's easier to get into the NBA. It's impossible. You might as well plan on winning the lotto than making it as a professional basketball player. When I was growing up, I remember I'm born in 1950, the blackest thing you could be was a doctor or lawyer. And that's not true anymore. So we have, I mean, it is for the black middle class and upper middle class perpetuating itself, and the black underclass is perpetuating itself. Now, you ask me how to cure it. We need a jobs bill. We need a comprehensive jobs bill. We need people to be able to work hard and make it into the system in the way that our parents did, from the no class to the working class in factories, and from the working class to the middle class. But those jobs are all gone. First they went south, then they went to India, and now they're in China, you know? So that we need a new economic revolution that gives people a stake in the system. That's the first thing. But the causes of poverty are both structural and behavioral. So we need reform of public education, we need job opportunities, but we also need a revolution in our own mind when we actually believe. You know, one of the leitmotifs this evening is believing in a dream. And the slaves, think about how hard it was to be a slave and believe that literacy would set you free when you were a slave. Think about how hard it was to be a Jew for thousands of years of Western history. But the Jewish people believed in deferred gratification. Well, black people, when I was growing up, deferred gratification too. Baby, it's Dr. King and them. Dr. King and them gonna make it better. And forget George Wallace, you're gonna work hard and you're gonna be a doctor. Cornell West and I sometimes sit around and have a drink. Cornell loves Casablanca around the corner. And when he was here, we would have a drink, and we'd say how crazy our parents were to believe, and grandparents, that we would actually one day be sitting up at Harvard, or sitting on the stage in the Brattle Theater, or on WGBH, or on the 10 of the million things that, you know, people like you and all of us have been able to achieve. There was no rational logic for them to believe it, but they did, and we were stupid enough to believe it, and guess what? It worked. It worked. And now when we have more opportunities for our people, a huge percentage don't believe it anymore. We need to reform the prison system. This whole, the draconian drug laws, so that, as this Michelle Alexander said famously, it's the new Jim Crow. Where are all the black men? They're in jail. We got to get them out. We got to give them the right to vote again. We got to keep them from going in the first place. We got to change the laws.
Likewise, I am very concerned.
Because I've been to jail.
You've been to the White House too.
Yeah, but I've been to the White House already, and it's a lot more fun to go on your own 2 feet than because you go on with a police officer and the whole world is. How many people? The beer cold. The beer cold. The beer cold. But please don't ask me about the beer.
I was going to add to that Latinos are close to 50 million in this country. 1 out of every 4 Americans is now almost 1 out of every 4 is of a Latino background, and yet the dropout rate in elementary school is frightening. We are not having enough Latino kids even finish elementary school, let alone go to middle school. And
that's economic, man. That's economic.
The biggest attraction for many young Latino males is the army. If there is a future, the army is going to give it to them.
And for a lot of black males too. A lot of black males. The same thing when I take my graduate students and say, you can write your PhD. You have to paint the picture. It's the yellow brick road. Put one foot in front of the other, you can make it. And not just making it to jail. Right. Yeah, because a lot of these kids, when you interview them, they go, I'm going to jail anyway. I'm going to jail anyway. By the time I'm 20, I'm going to jail. My daddy's in jail. My granddaddy's in jail. You know.
I need to add one element here that I think is important, and that is that Latinos are defined by yet another factor, yet another element that we have not mentioned here, and that is immigration. Many of us Latinos are immigrants. Many of us see ourselves, certainly me, see ourselves as immigrants.
How old were you when you came?
I was 25.
25?
25, rather late. And I have to tell you that there is a sharp difference between the Latino group as a minority group and others, in that the closeness, and you know it because of all the things that you've been doing in your PBS show, the closeness with the place once called home is nothing like what the Italians had, or the Jews, or the Germans. You can be in the past if you live in California within 10 minutes by just crossing the border if you want, or in Puerto Rico within an hour from Hartford, you're back in San Juan. You don't close the past in such a sharp, decisive fashion. And this connection with a place called home defines the Latino community in a way that is unlike any other group. I think that this connection with Latin America and Latinos is something that makes us move in the way we move, and makes
That's a good
maybe
point. I
also
hadn't thought of that. That's a good point.
makes us much more transnational, much more coming and going constantly.
You're saying the border between your past ethnic self and your present ethnic self is porous.
Very porous.
And quite
and you carry
and
it with
fluid.
yourself. Absolutely.
Sure.
You take
I
it.
met a lot of the people I interviewed in the series in Mexico would say, yeah, I've been back here 3 months. I used to live in L.A. I go like, were you illegal? And they go, no, we crossed illegally both ways.
Yeah.
And just like it was normal.
And it's a normal thing, and it's part of the life of the community. There are entire Mexican communities in Oaxaca where there are no men. All the men are in the United States.
Yeah.
Women, children, and old people. And then come the winter, men arrive, and then they disappear again. And it is not only about Latinos in the United States, it's about the absence of those individuals in Latin America.
Yeah. I don't know anything about the Morenos movement, but I'll look it up. But, more that were people of color. There were white Moors and blackamoors. Othello was a blackamoor, and that was Shakespeare, right? But there were people from northern Africa and who were Arabic and Muslim.
There is no equivalent of that 10 within the Latino community, but Skip and I were talking today about an important figure that I would really relate to Du Bois in a way that might be somewhat of a stretch, but I think it's very important, and it's my next book. It's coming out in February. In 1925, José Vasconcelos, who had been a Minister of Education, is the guy who helped Rivera, Orozco, Siqueiros put together all their art in murals all over Mexico City and in other parts of the country, wrote an essay called Mestizaje. Mestizaje is the condition that brings together the different mestizos. And he suggests, we were talking about it, you had read it, that mestizos are going to rule the world, that they are the ultimate. You can see it in kind of Darwinian, but also racist in Aryan Nazi ways. They have superseded all previous minorities, all previous ethnic groups, and mestizos will come to rule the entire world. With the Chicano movement in the United States in the 1960s, the one that coincided with the civil rights era, took Vasconcelos as the main philosopher, prophet figure, and believed that their quest to transform the United States was a quest to bring mestizos to the very center of culture. When Obama was campaigning, there was talk of looking at him as a mestizo through the prism of Vasconcelos. Very different discourse from Du Bois, but one that talks about not a small elite, but the masses being meant or targeted to dominate. And there is within the Latino community this kind of prophetic utopian or dystopian vision of we are subverting this country from within by demographic facts, and that ultimately the country is going to be reconquered, la reconquista.
And the immediate relevance here is the new mixed race movement. When you get a lot of people who are, what we used to call mulattoes, still call mulattoes, who would check not black or white, they would check other or mixed race, or now we have so many categories on the census. And Vasconcelos will be seen as a prophet of that movement. He had his problems.
Serious problems.
But what's so funny is that independently, in 2 weeks, I guess, the new Norton critical edition of Cain will be published, which I've edited with my colleague Rudolph Bird. We have a whole section on Vasconcelos' influence on Gene Toomer. Because Gene Toomer said, I'm not black, I'm not white, I'm a new race. But he did it because he was embarrassed about being black. It wasn't a positive thing, it was a negative thing. Vasconcelos was more of a positive thing. Du Bois was a mixed race person, but he was descended from a Haitian. Dubois. His father was a Haitian. People forget that, but he was. But he was obviously mulatto. Look at Du Bois's picture. But Du Bois was the blackest man of all. You know, he was not worrying about his hybridity because he was trying to, you know, save black people as black people. What I think about the talented 10, there's obviously some people are going to be brain surgeons, and some people are going to do different other occupations. We need to get more and more Latinos in the MIT and Harvard and Yale and Stanford, but we need to get more and more Latinos in community colleges. Not everybody is going to be a neurosurgeon, right? And they can't be. What I would like to see is a diminishing of the economic disparity between people who are working class and people who are upper class. I mean, we have a class separation in this country today we couldn't even imagine 10 years ago or 20 years ago. You know, with 1% of the people having such a huge percentage of the wealth, it's just not fair, and it's not right. We need more economic democracy in this country. We need to be able to give poor people a stake in the system again, like my father had. My father's still alive, 97, worked 2 jobs, worked in a paper mill in the day and was a janitor in the evening. And he believed that my brother's chief of oral surgery at Bronx Lebanon Hospital, and I'm a professor at Harvard. And my daddy believed that we could do that. I mean, it's amazing. They felt that the system wasn't going to crush them. They felt that they could interact with the system and make it and have a good life. Now, so many of us don't think our kids will have a life as good as ours, that there's not that kind of progress. That's what Barack Obama, if Barack wants to save his presidency, he needs to define himself as the economic president. He needs to change, to bring back the hope that we have in this system, and I don't know if we could do it. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Ilan Stavans. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, man.
Gracias.